social media has huge positives, but it has huge negatives as well. So when you're building on Twitter, you're building on Instagram, you're building on Facebook, you're building on borrowed land. You can lose your business overnight.
We're going to lose the best people, the best minds, the best talent, because the industry can't afford them.
Your subject has to really make you think, holy shit, I want to click this thing.
As a brand, you're planting a seed, and you just say, here are the things you definitely don't do.
Do that. Save it.
I've never worked in fashion, but I'm now connected with some of the biggest fashion brands in the world.
Let's just say I know a guy who knows a guy who knows another guy.
You're doing brand deals.
I'm sold out.
Memes and Machines, a podcast for marketeers, entrepreneurs, or anyone who is interested in the attention economy. This week we covered a lot. We talked about Catty's side hustle and how he's exploiting, sorry, I didn't mean exploited, how he's working with fans today. However, there are a lot of lessons to be learned in Catty's side hustle. We talk about Zuck and Lex doing a world first, this obscene podcast, and what does this mean for marketeers? We talk about Facebook AI. Are we going to move into a world where we're augmenting things around us? What does this mean for marketing? In the midst of all this innovation, we went back to grassroots. We talked email marketing. What do you need to know about email marketing? And we concluded on how to tell a great story.
The past, the present, and the future of marketing in under 90 minutes.
And Catty turned 28. He's now the past. Man is past it. Catman, it's good to see you're alive after your week-long birthday celebration. How was it?
Month-long birthday celebration. It was good, man. Yeah, a lot of fun. Turning 28, which is almost getting over the hill there. Got my yearly Man United shirt as a gift from my parents, so life's good.
Are you 28?
Yeah. It's a surprise.
Wow. You were always the young guy in the group. Bro, you're old.
Yeah, man. Luckily, everyone else is also much older now. So I'm still the young guy in the group.
Bro, you're past it. I think I'm going to have to trade you in for a younger co-host. I'm trying to stay cool. I'm trying to stay cool and fresh.
Yeah, this is bad for your brand, this.
Good man. Okay, to kick off, I want to talk about something you've been building for some time now. Pathetic fashion. You have a meme page. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, as we just said, I'm 28, so I've lost all touch with the kids, with how social platforms operate. And so, a few years ago, I started a meme page with the goal of, so I've always, context, always had meme pages. It's been kind of my route into marketing. I used to grow pages on Twitter when I was in my teenage years. What I learned is that it gave me this kind of intuition for how Twitter works as a platform. It really taught me how to grow audiences on Twitter, and then I could basically export that insight to brands. And that's how we, really got started as an agency. I realized Instagram was a platform that I hadn't really figured out yet. It was, I did a lot of work with brands on Instagram, but I didn't feel like I had the same depth of knowledge as I did with Twitter. And so I basically took my own experience with how do you learn these platforms and realized the best way is to just build your own audiences. Can you actually grow on the platform yourself by doing something and creating content around something you're passionate about? And that will actually give you the best learnings possible. And so that's what I did. I started an MBA page called Pathetic Fashion, which is just memes around fashion. It's, a kind of secondary interest of mine in the fashion industry. So I had obviously existing knowledge that I could use for it. And I've just kind of been steadily growing it. It's on 60K followers now. And it's just given me, a level of insight into Instagram that I didn't have before, but also is incredible for keeping yourself on top of meme culture, on top of what formats are working. just really, works that muscle for understanding what audiences engage to, or what audiences engage with, and what they react to. And yeah, it's been, I think, like the biggest value add I could say for becoming a great marketer, in my opinion, is growing great audiences yourself. And meme pages is one way, but also other people are doing that through personal branding as well, growing a LinkedIn following, growing a Twitter following. It gives you this muscle for content creation that you don't get if you're not being a practitioner, in my opinion.
Yeah, Mr. Beast is famous for saying, if you post 100 times on YouTube, until you've posted 100 times, you haven't yet started. And part of me thinks that wisdom is simply the answers are in the activity. Doing, to post 100 times, you learn so much through that process, that reiterative, work your way through until you get the right answer. And it does become formulaic in many respects. There is a little rumor about your page that, and I may have been scrolling down Instagram, you're doing brand deals.
I'm sold out.
So you have sold out. Tell us about that, because you started with earnest intentions for your own curiosity to learn some things and get better at your craft. And actually, inadvertently now, you're making money?
A small amount of money, but it's, for the amount of time what I spend on the project, it's pretty decent. I think the great thing here is that, I've been running the page for 3 years and didn't make any money for 2. And so now it's like the brand deals are starting to come in, but it's because of 2 years of building an audience. And in today's world, audiences will always be monetized. Brands will always pay to reach people that they can't reach elsewhere. And so building an audience around a niche, you can actually work with really interesting brands, despite them being fairly small audiences comparatively. I also think it's like, it's a backdoor to any industry. I've never worked in fashion. I've never, apart from obviously in the agency world, I've worked with a few fashion brands, but I'm now connected with some of the, biggest fashion brands in the world, their social teams, their kind of marketing leaders, connected directly with them through this page, despite not working in the industry. And so it's a really kind of clever backdoor to any industry, I'd say. But yeah, I recently worked with a big US fashion retailer, women's fashion retailer, very, very kind of well known here. And in doing so, uncovered a really unique growth strategy they have, which I think is really interesting and I love. They obviously, like any other brand, they have their regular product photography that goes out every day. They have reels, they have all the kind of usual stuff. And then once every 2 weeks, they'll identify a meme or humor creator on Instagram, and they will partner on creating a post. And Instagram have this cool feature now where you can do a joint post. So both pages post the same or author the same post, and they both kind of benefit from the reach to both of their audiences. And essentially they'll do that once every week, once every 2 weeks, and with a new creator, a new meme page, which aligns with our audiences, which aligns with their values. And as a result, for example, the post that we did together got 600k impressions, 30k likes, way beyond their kind of regular engagement figures. And if you scroll down their page, they're doing it once every week, once every 2 weeks. The cool thing I got is I got like unique insight into how they did this. And it came from their social team just being very, very understanding and in tune with how these pages work. So they gave me a very detailed brief of exactly, the kind of language that I should lean towards and the products I should create, but really gave me full creative freedom on how I think this should look. And we're very, very flexible and fluid with, my creativity. I've worked with other brands this year. So I worked with one of the biggest, most well-known luxury retailers that anyone listening to this will have heard of, but I won't mention the name. And it was a very different experience. They gave me no briefing whatsoever. They kind of just sent me, we want you to do a post. Could you please send it in the next week? There was very little collaboration whatsoever. And I think it's very difficult for someone to create a page about a post about a brand they've never worked in. So they had no insight into their audience, no real creative lead. And as a result, the post didn't do half as well as this post did. And so, yeah, it's really interesting learnings, and I think a really brilliant strategy from them.
I think there's so many There are so many lessons that you unpicked there. I think the first one is there is huge opportunity in finding those feature unlocks. You talk about that the collaboration feature on a post. That's just one of many, right? But you're right, the impact of getting the creative right that feels native to both parties, co-authored, fundamentally just fuels the algorithm. So you're going to get that disproportionate reach. It reminds me a lot when we had a conversation a long time ago about Twitter Spaces at the time, now X Spaces. And if you think of that, that was massively underutilized as a feature, but in joining a space with other creators, you would effectively hijack their audience because it was prime real estate at the top of the application. It's a new feature, and as a rule, not always, new features are often prioritized as the platforms are trying to gain adoption. So I think foundationally, there's wisdom in what you have done to learn and understand the platform, two, to test new features, and then just that general broader point around how brands should interact with creators. It's a fine balance between being not over prescriptive, giving agency and control to a creator to be just that, but giving them all the tools and information they need to do an effective job. If you were breaking down that brief, what's in that brief? Give me the specifics that were included that really helped you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So they had, they'd gone through my page and they picked out posts that they liked. And they said, like, these 5 posts, these are great. This is the kind of thing we'd like this to look like. They then looked at they gave me all of their previous partnerships. So, like, this is the kind of general thread we have. They then gave me some thought starters, like, fall's coming up. We could do something around changing clothes for warmer weather. Some other basically, like, creative thought starters. And then there were, like, very light brand guidelines, like you can't show this, can't show that, but nothing too kind of restrictive or crazy. But it was just like, it got me from 0 to 1, right? Rather than, like, I had this, like, blank page of, like, not really knowing where to start. It just made my life a lot easier. And then there was a bit of back and forth with them while they kind of gave some feedback and my ideas, but they were just great to work with, very collaborative.
I love that. And I think as you described that brief and you're walking through what you saw, it's incredibly logical. You're as a brand, you're planting a seed. You're trying not to limit creativity by being too restrictive. And, you just say, here are the things you definitely don't do. You put some guardrails in place. And I think healthy creative output is a back and forth. You usually get those great results once you meet at that tension. Dude, I love that.
Yeah, it's logical, but most people don't want to, put that little bit of work in beforehand. They assume that creators will just, come up with this stuff out of nowhere. But yeah, I think it's great. Literally 20 minutes extra work on their end for 10x results.
I wonder if I think it's symbolic of marketing more broadly around we commoditize so many tasks. We treat them as a transactional event. I am going to work with X page to distribute this message. And actually, if you think of marketing of yesteryear, when you had to put significant advertising budgets behind your activity, you had to put a lot of creative thought. And I'm not saying advertising was better, but when the stakes are much higher and the cost implications of getting it wrong are higher, there's almost this inherent forced behavior. It does get me, I want to segue into a point. It kind of links to what I was just alluding to there. I've been thinking a lot about pricing structures for advertising agencies. And we spoke about this before, but I believe we're transitioning into a productivity paradigm where small teams will achieve things only thought possible by much larger, well-resourced teams. AI applications are now leveling the playing field. And the parallel I've started to, I suppose, link people to is in the same way social media democratized the way information flows and the way we could communicate, that subtly meant that if you understood the internet, if you spoke the internet more fluently than someone else, you could gain disproportionate attention. What we're doing now, we're going a step further with productivity. I don't need 100 people in a production team to achieve hundreds of pieces of content. I need to be efficient. I need to know what to say. I need to know the internet. But fundamentally, the dynamics have been leveled once again. So all the advantages you have as a big organization, distribution scale, there's a good chance that you don't have those advantages anymore. And actually what you're left with are all the disadvantages, diseconomies of scale, too many process, too many layers, you become clunky. So I'm going a step further and thinking, right, in the advertising world, currently you pay for time. So you as a client pay an agency for the time spent on a task. What happens when now the cost or the time spent has been reduced significantly? Do you pay the same, or are we still paying time? Because this is a race to zero. And the advertising industry can't survive if it is a race to zero, because fundamentally, we're going to lose the best people, the best minds, the best talent, because the industry can't afford them. So I have this belief, and I have for some time, that you should be paid for outcomes. And if I can achieve something that would take you a year, but I can do it in 5 minutes, I should be paid for that outcome, not because it took me 5 minutes, right? I wonder, and I would love to get your take on, do you see a world in the next 5-year horizon whereby we have to completely revolutionize how we think about selling services like advertising agencies?
It's interesting. While you're saying that, I was thinking to myself, okay, so what is the alternative for? And I guess you pay for reach. Our agency's going to now start to be paid. You got this many impressions, you got this many views per month. That's like an interesting model. And then it is more about, so I think, like you said, you start to pay an agency for time, and I think you can sometimes fall under the tick kind of box ticking, attitude, where it is just, we'll have a content calendar, we're going to post 6 times a week, and on Monday we do a Q&A, on Wednesday we do a quiz, just like very kind of regimented, and you start to lose the kind of creativity, the brilliance that I think an agency is there for. And so, like, how do you start to, incentivize your teams to produce your results over just output, just kind of, ticking boxes, turning the machine?
And getting those metrics right is equally as important.
Yeah.
When we trivialize, if we put the measure of success as how many followers you garner, behaviors will follow suit, right? We saw it in the infancy of social media. People would come to us with a brief that said, I want to grow my following on Instagram. And you push back and you say, well, let me find out a little more about you. What do you do? And they say, we sell shoes. And say, well, okay, you want to sell more shoes? Maybe increasing your following will support that goal. But fundamentally, growing a following should not be the goal. It did get me thinking. I don't think I ever can. I'm playing it out in my mind. I don't have an answer. All I do know is I think 2 to 3 things are going to happen this year. Number one, there are some very smart freelancers that are going to take advantage of this kind of old world meets new world in productivity. We're seeing it right now. There's a designer that speaks publicly as a freelancer about his ability. I think he generated something like $1.2 million, and he's just a designer. And I say just, I don't mean to trivialize it, but he's a very skilled, competent designer. But he's just found a productivity hack where he productizes his services and he generates such a huge, significant amount of money. I consider that to be incredibly smart. But, when you have this going off, and that's going to become normalized in many respects, it does put into question the entire systems in which the ad industry is built on.
Well, I think I think you're referring to, I think his name's Brett. I think he found a company called DesignJoy. I don't know if you'll speak about the same person.
That's the one, Design. Yeah, it's DesignJoy.
I think what he did was always found like a glitch in the matrix where he instead of calling himself a freelancer, he productized his service where a company pays a subscription for access to unlimited creative assets. And that sounds like, oh my God, what a crazy deal you get there. And so it's like you pay him $5K a month or whatever it is, $10K a month, and you get unlimited creative assets. And I think what he realized was, even if you do that, the amount of work that you get isn't the same as if you were a full-time designer. You're not maxed out. Your time isn't at capacity. And so he was able to sell, many more of these subscriptions, because it was easier to transact, easier for a company to purchase a product than it is to hire someone and have them in the team on the wage bill, whatever. And as a result, was able to generate, like you said, I think it was like millions of dollars a year for a solo designer. And I imagine he has all of those productivity optimizations down to an absolute T. They're able to produce all of this as a one-man band. So I think you're right. Like, this is the exact example of output being valued over time. They have no idea how long he spends on this stuff. They just know that when they need to produce something, he'll produce it.
Yeah, he's very transparent. I've watched a couple of his videos where he talks about, because a lot of the questions are, how do you deal with the feedback? Particularly on a subjective craft like design. Design's one of those very difficult things where you're often interpreting people's minds who don't know what they want. The creative artist is so subjective, and we all kind of get an instinctual pull towards things that are just right or work. But explaining it sometimes, very difficult, very difficult. Dude, did you see the Zuck and Lex podcast that went on last week?
Yeah, I saw the first couple of minutes. I haven't watched the full interview, but I saw the tech, and I think it's a great example of Zuck taking to heart all of the feedback and all of the shit he got for the initial metaverse presentation, and saying, "Give me a year, and then you'll be crawling back." I think it's still one of those pieces of technology where the use cases are all probably quite specific and quite niche, but it's very clear that this is where this technology is heading, and whether it will replace meeting rooms or replace like family gatherings, I don't know. But I think for many people, I think a lot of the initial feedback and reactions to these things, it comes from people who live in kind of privileged outcomes. They they're their family, they're able to attend whatever school, whatever work they're allowed. You think for people who don't have access to the opportunities we do, this is now a way that they can basically get the value that you would get from being in a room with someone, for being in a classroom, being in an office, as close to that experience, physically as we can get now with technology, which I think is just huge.
Yeah, and for anyone that didn't see that, it was the first time for me where I saw this type of technology being used, and the detail is phenomenal. So you have Lex Fridman and Mark Zuckerberg in different rooms, in different parts of the world, speaking and conversing with one another, and you hear them describe the experience of, it's uncanny. And it's the first time when you go, okay, well, this feels real. One of the big debates that went on when you mentioned there the kind of flop, if you want to call it, the metaverse, or the thing that never happened, right? One of the bigger barriers was software today is very capable. We have an ability. When you look at this software, it's incredible. What you do have right now is a hardware problem. And one of the things that Meta tried to do with their efforts in the metaverse were, how do we become ubiquitous? How do we create something that someone can afford? How do we create things that scale? And what we saw from Zuck and Lex was really at the forefront of innovation. The processing power, the headsets, everything's like very expensive. Today, in a future realm, not the case. But I will say, when I watched that, you started to go, okay, well, I do see a world where this becomes very useful when you think of more immersive experiences. And I suppose next year is going to be very important when Apple roll out their spatial computing device, which again is a step forward for the privileged, admittedly, to start to have these more rich digital immersive experiences. So I do think the next 5 years is going to be interesting. But if I'm a marketeer, I'm maybe not paying too much attention for the next year or two.
I think that's pretty fair. I think we saw with the Apple announcement that the hardware is still very much in its V1 phase, where it's very heavy headset that most people won't use. And I think you're right. I think marketers thinking about a spatial strategy isn't quite there yet. But I think one killer use case will emerge. We're not sure what it is yet. Another example I see a lot is I'm friends with a few people in SF who are convinced that it will replace the laptop. They think they're going to sit and work and have these kind of dashboards everywhere, and that's how they're going to operate, as engineers, as analysts. I think, one of these use cases is going to emerge very quickly because it replaces and improves on the original experience. We're just not sure what that is. It's going to be yet.
Yeah, you're right. It'll probably be something quite simple. I still use my phone for tasks that I probably would be better suited using a laptop just for the convenience. And I've got to assume that we're going to see this next frontier of hardware innovations. Talking of hardware, did you see Facebook's AI glasses, Rayban? Tell me you're on a waiting list. You're going to buy some. What did you think of it?
I think again, so we're getting when he's like edging closer now. So what is clearly going to be a big market for wearable technology. I think the big problem we've always had with wearables is you don't look cool. Google Glasses, people wouldn't want to wear that. You look very uncool. Apple Vision headset, I'm not even going to start with what you look like wearing one of those. What Meta have done really well is they've understood that let's just take that equation out of the question and partner with Ray-Ban, who already produce probably the most timeless fashion item of all time. It's never really out of trend. It's never really, doesn't really look bad on anyone. And so it's easy for anybody to wear and purchase this, and it not be you'd have no idea it's that particular wearable. So, whether it's something I'm going to buy, I don't know, but I think it's really smart.
I'm in, bro. I'm already hoping, waiting for the day I can buy them. A, because I like Ray-Bans, you're right, and two, there is something about this that I'm drawn into. I think the accessibility of the price point is really important. I have to commend Meta for making the price point accessible, because I imagine this is arguably a lost leader for them. When you think of the technology that these glasses will entail, I have to assume it's a lost leader. And then in the limited interactions we've seen or the product showcase, I thought it was very smart because we can all relate to being in an unfamiliar place and thinking, what's that? Right? Yeah. And it feels like the Facebook AI application, which I have to assume is just like Siri that works. The intention is just we're going to get a response that's actually useful in real time. I can do all the functionality that I find really useful today around language no longer being a barrier. I wasn't massively sold on the linking to live streaming. That felt... did you see that?
Yeah, for me, that's I think the content creation for me was where I saw this obvious use case. I know that I think for live streaming, it doesn't quite make sense because you usually want to be in the frame.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of creators, as a companion to the phone device, I can see it making a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, it's like just wearing a GoPro, right? So the intention that I can see through the lens of, and you can, so many more creators now are finding this very distinctive style to them. Mm-hmm. Have you seen the creator that's going around on TikTok that she's on a train and she does these hyper fast, I need to find you the link, but every big fashion brand and every luxury brand is working with her now. I saw her do an ad with Bentley I've seen her go through. It's like incredible. And all she does is she just found this really slick editing style that's very ownable to her. It reminds me a bit, and this is going to sound like I'm a boomer, but it reminds me of, remember Prodigy, Smack My Bitch Up, the video?
Yeah.
And like there's irony. It's like you assume that it's a man all the way through, and it happens to be a woman at the end of the film. It's like poetic, beautiful, amazing film. But how that's shot is basically the style that's been adopted but supercharged by this creator. And I'm going to find your name because you'll love her. And I've just seen her rise in the last month, just explode onto the scene. Every big brand is working with her. She's incredible. But when I saw the glasses, I thought of her and thought, right, this is going to level up her creative ability. I personally didn't like the live streaming link, but I agree. I agree on the creator element.
I think if you think that it's going to sound dumb, but like holding up your phone to film something is kind of annoying. And so,
true.
If you're in like a fashion show, is the example I think of, and you're sitting front row and you want to record the event, but you don't want to sit there, I guess, missing the event. That is the big solve there. Is I suppose you're now able to enjoy these events through your first-hand experience without also viewing it through a phone screen.
You're right. That the way you just described that, I go, how many people go to a music concert and you just get annoyed by someone filming in front of you? All I do now, everyone's going to be wearing shades inside.
Yeah.
Why are you wearing Ray-Bans inside?
Yeah.
I will say, though, the one thing about these, I do like the simplicity of the features shown in the product showcase, but there is part of me going, it's probably going to find its one user case and it's used just for that. And it reminds me often of Alexa. Alexa has 1,000 possible user cases and features I can use. I literally ask it for the weather and to like play the radio. And I believe something like 98% of people use it only for those two features. Alexa, what's the weather? Play music. We don't have other. And I probably believe, and I don't know if it says more about the laziness of humanity or the limitations of technology, maybe a bit of both.
Just a lack of imagination. I don't ask Alexa to play radio. I just ask it for weather. That day, every single day, and she has no other purpose in my life.
And she doesn't even get that right. Doesn't even get that right all the time. I will ask you one more question on this topic, because we said spatial computing. We talked about this. Do you think there's a role in marketing for augmenting brand experiences around you, or are brands going to get really annoying with this? How do you see this playing out if we do start to augment more digital experiences within our real world?
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's always impossible to imagine how this will permeate, how it will look. Like if you think of Snapchat's vision for this, they've experimented with brands being able to take, augmented reality animations and putting them on like landmarks or geographical locations, and they envisage a world where we're kind of walking around interacting with virtual placements all of the time. That is potentially a scenario that could play out, but with all these things, it requires the person activating them. It isn't just appearing in front of you, because I think there's going to be, in the same way there are restrictions and laws around where you can advertise with out-of-home placements in the world. Well, if you start to now impose on people's digital live digital experiences, there has to be some limitations there, and who gets to advertise in these spaces and how that will work. I think the brands that should be thinking about this are the ones who can actually offer elevated experiences through augmented reality. So, brands or jewelry companies who want to let people use AR to try something on, or to look at what a watch might look like on yourself. That is interesting, because again, it's offering an experience that you couldn't get without AR, without some kind of spatial offering. It's like there are certain brands that feel native to this kind of technology, and other brands that I don't think are going to be super relevant.
Yeah. The first application that I saw that really connected me to the idea that this is a better experience, although the execution wasn't perfect, was IKEA introducing the ability to almost place potential furniture within your environment. And you can see a world where that becomes incredibly useful, right? And there's many other experiences when you're trying to illustrate in real time what something will be. I do think there's going to be an enhancement of shopping experiences, online shopping experiences as a consequence. You get all the advantages of doing things online. And now you get potentially the advantages of seeing something in real life, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting space for me. And that's probably the area that if I was a marketeer and I sold things online, I'd maybe pay attention to, which is good. Dude, I want to talk about something less in the future, maybe something in the past. We speak about this a lot, and I think you've got a very strong point of view, but let's talk about email. Firstly, why do you like email? And what should I consider as part of my email strategy if I am a online brand trying to sell things?
We talk about social media a lot as, you know, a great way to build audience, to build brand. Social media has huge positives, but it has huge negatives as well, in that you're constantly battling this algorithm that we always, we spend hours and hours talking about. Sit in a room, banging our head against the wall. How do we beat the algorithm? How do we beat the algorithm? Email is a great platform which exists independently of an algorithm. You don't have to worry about. There are a few things you have to make sure happen so you don't end up in spam folder. But apart from that, you're pretty safe from having to worry about how do you optimize the algorithm. You just have to optimize for subject lines or, know your audience better.
So number one, you're saying in a world increasingly dictated to by algorithms, ownership or having channels that you own is smart business.
Exactly.
One.
Building an audience that you own and you retain. Email is a protocol, so it isn't a channel, right? And if I build an audience on one email newsletter platform and they cease to exist, or I don't want to use them anymore, I can just move that email list over. Simple. And I think having a huge email list, because of that reason, is value in itself, because social platforms, as many people learn, own your audience. You do not own your audience. So when you're building on Twitter, you're building on Instagram, you're building on Facebook, you're building on borrowed land. And at any time, that platform can decide to, reduce your reach or completely take away your channel. And I've seen many such cases. Brands, it's, a little less frequent, but it can still happen. And you can lose your business overnight. And so building an email, being a strong email, is a platform you will always own. It's an audience you will always own, regardless of anybody who tries to take it from you. And that's just a smart thing to do.
Okay, I'm sold. How do I start? Walk me through. I'm going to give you a scenario right now. I sell lingerie online and I have a small business. What are the steps, or how would you be thinking about launching a email that is going to gain traction?
Well, I think the first thing, your most powerful surface area is always going to be your product or your website. So if you have existing users, you have some existing traction, email capture all over those faces is the best way to go. That's how you kind of build that initial audience. But then the best way to think about, really, if you really want to grow a large audience on email, a lot of brands immediately default to, so a lot of brands will immediately default to building an email list, which is just a series of announcements. It's, we've dropped a new product, we've launched some new things. It's kind of the standard. What people don't realize is that you can have separate tracks for email campaigns. So you can have a completely separate loop for sending offers, sending discounts, sending campaigns to your audience members and getting them to really purchase stuff. If you want to grow an email list that's actually going to scale beyond what your brand could, then you need to think about it like with any other social platform. How am I providing information or value to people independent of my brand? So a lingerie company, for example, you could start an email list which every single week we're going to give you tips on how you should be styling lingerie, or tips on, what the trends in lingerie look like this week, right? So it's a series of content which, if you took your brand out of it, people would still subscribe to. They still get value from it, because you're now competing in a space with email that has just tons of offers, tons of products, and brands shouting at people. To cut through, there's now the opportunity to actually build some value here. How does somebody who doesn't know your brand want to actually sign up for the email newsletter anyway? Because it's useful, it's valuable. And so you should always be thinking about how email can sit independently from your product offering.
Okay, so step one, once you've decided that you want an email, is use existing real estate, being your website, and make it very easy at every touch point, or every relevant touch point, for people to sign up. Then, if you want to grow, you think about it in the context of, I suppose, your broader content marketing efforts, with a view of driving people. And what you're saying subsequent to that is you're able to think about email in a much more nuanced, smart way by using segmentation. And in the same way, you may use different adverts to make someone aware of you, all the way through to driving you from cart abandonment to sale. You can use similar tactics and segment audiences in a similar way in email. It's very much you can use scientific mechanics to deliver great results, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's shortcuts to this as well. So one interesting thing you can consider is there's huge marketplaces for email newsletter lists as well. People have built these lists and they're looking to sell them. So you might want to think about acquiring and a list of emails in your niche, in your audience, as like a way to bootstrap that and get from 0 to 1.
How do you qualify that? Because often the black markets of social media pages and email lists that have passed and are, say, in the UK, GDPR compliant, etc. What things should you be looking out for if you're going to pursue that path?
Well, I'd say the great thing with email is that it isn't a black market, in the same way that trading social media pages is done on kind of unverified websites. Because when you sign up to Twitter, when you sign up to Instagram, you sign up
policy breach.
Yeah, you can't sell the pages. Email, you can acquire email newsletter lists. There's no real issue there, as long as you're acquiring the company behind them. So some kind of like legal things involved. But then you should do your due diligence. You should look into click-through rate, how many people who open the email actually then go through to click on one of the links. That's a very easy way to tell that they are people who are actually interested in the content, they're high signal users. And then, if they are a big email list in your niche, they've probably done brand deals in the past. They've done sponsorships. Again, like getting the data behind how many people are converting, how many people are clicking through, will tell you, is this a high signal audience, the kind of people that I want to be reaching? And the key there is obviously not to acquire the email newsletter list and just completely start selling them something different. How do I continue what the content looked like from that person and make it still feel organic? But yeah, it's a whole process for sure, but it's like it should be, you're doing due diligence like you would be acquiring a company.
Okay. And for Third Web, what have been the most, I suppose, successful editorial considerations when you're producing email?
Yeah, so, similar to what I just mentioned, our email could very easily have been a list of product updates, product announcements. But from day one, we decided this is going to be a resource for developers and people who aren't developers to learn about Web3 use cases and new concepts in Web3. And the number one highest clicked emails we've sent out are breakdowns of new concepts, of new, interesting technical trends that are happening in Web3, and they're kind of broken down in very understandable ways. And so, like, being very clear in the subject header, the subject is your number one, the number one creative thing you have to get right every week. That's basically it. So obsessing over...
It's your first 3 seconds, right? It's your meme bar, it's your headline, it's your hook,
exactly,
everything. Okay.
Exactly. And making sure it's short. So there's like a certain character limit you have to consider because mobile cuts off most email subjects. So if you can keep your email subject less than three words, 4 words, that's how you win. That's how we've seen good success. But being able to tease, you got to really ask the question, if I was scrolling on my email list, would I open this? Because asking someone to open an email is actually a pretty big deal when they're getting 1,000 a day. Right, so your subject has to really make you think, holy shit, I want to click this thing. I want to read what's inside. And getting that right in 5 words or less is an art. And so just obsessing over the subject is the thing that we've really done. And we kind of analyze it every week. We make sure that it passes that would I click this test. And then the content inside, I think, is it's very hard to give a general idea. But like I said, it should never feel commercial. I should be able to read the email and take third up out of it sometimes. Like, is this something I would read and it would give me value? And then obviously we're going to have some sales material in there every now and then, but it shouldn't just be sales material every week.
It sounds like, and the way you describe it is, you treat email marketing like you should any other marketing activity. Exactly. Job number 1 is capture people's attention. And you need to do that in the most compelling way. Job number 2 is how do you retain people? And overall, when you think of content marketing, it's about giving people a disproportionate amount of value. So if you consider these things, it's really interesting. When you were talking about the hook and obsessing over those 5 words, I watched a video with Alex Hormozi, and he's really shot to fame as, he's got an agenda, but he creates great short form content, largely driven through TikTok. And one of the things he said, and it made a lot of sense, he speaks generalisms and I suppose wisdom, and he's got these kind of sound bites that he delivers, and he does it very well. And one that he said that I think I connected with is he spends 90% of his time on the hook. When he's creating content, 90% of all his effort is spent on the hook. And I go, that's probably a lie. In fact, it's definitely a lie. But there's wisdom in that, okay, out of all these things, everything after the hook is redundant if I don't get that right. That's a little hyperbolic, but I think there's certainly truth in that in email when there is no thereafter, right? But
I think it's 100% true. I think about when we write a Twitter thread, we'll spend the whole thread itself might take a few hours. We'll probably spend 40 minutes to an hour on the first tweet, like getting that first tweet right.
That first 100%. Hook, go reiterating around that,
and it will go back. Like being Juan, who I write all our content with, like we'll go back and forth, deleting stuff, like debating on that first tweet because it has to be right. And it's like, if it's not, people aren't going to click it. I feel like so many amazing pieces of content completely flop because I read the first tweet and I go, I don't want to read that. Like it doesn't grab me. And yeah, I think that's like probably a smart framework.
You've heard it here. I'm not going to say first. You've heard it here second. Spend 90% of your energy on the hook. Forget the rest. You can see us all just dropping these like hyperbolic, just inflammatory lines that keep people, and everyone's just disappointed after the hook.
Yep. That's
the world. That's the world we're moving into. I want to conclude. We usually finish this thing talking about a debate or a controversial idea of the week, and I want to conclude on something different. Stories. I watched a video about Christopher Nolan, famous director, and he's very big in creating shapes around his story arc. So think of a film like Inception. Inception's a really complex plot, and how he maps out any story arc of a film, he puts it into different layers and shapes. And he's very well versed at doing that. So through this process, you can create simplicity and complexity. And it got me thinking about how do I intuitively think about storytelling for brands in the context of like social content or creating vision films or those types of editorial pieces. So I'm going to ask you, and then I'll deliver me. how should you structure a story on social media, and what's your playbook that you use?
Good question. So what I think the storytelling we've always done is usually represented in video, but I think it can play out in other formats as well. Funnily enough, going back to what we were just talking about, the hook is always really important. So can you summarize where the story is going in one sentence? And that's the thing you should lead with. I would say something we've always done when it comes to when it comes to storytelling is focus on a narrative again, it's kind of go back over what I've said, a narrative which is independent of our brand. Like it's a story that somebody would find interesting regardless of whether our brand was involved. And how do we then tell that? And I think just use a lot of the devices that you see, work really well in cinema and in TV. Like I think you do have to be hyperbolic sometimes. You do have to be dramatic. Using editing to illustrate a story and making sure that you do it in as fewer words as possible. I think like making sure that you don't go overboard is important because synchronous is there. And I've seen it's very easy. I think people, they have like a glossy ideas of marketing in the past where, you've seen like big copywriting pieces or you've seen like big cinematic, advert spots that take ages to get to the point. And things have changed now where, you have a limit on people's attention. And so being able to tell the story in a very short period of time is important. I'm curious to hear what you think.
I agree with all of that. I agree with the word tax that you describe. One of my favorite sayings is it should always be as simple as possible, but not simpler. I tend to view that through the lens of storytelling. I think you're right. Having a hook, I think it's either or. I think you can go in with a provocative hook that grabs people's attention and leaves them wanting more, or you can tell the story very quickly. Mr. Beast does this very well. Within 8 seconds, you know exactly what's going to happen in the next 15 minutes, but I'm still left wanting more because the story is compelling enough. So I think you can do either or. I generally think I agree around telling the bigger story that is independent. I call it laying the context. Lay the context to the story, and that should, in most cases, not be about you, but probably the industry you're in. I then think as you tell that story, you should create a problem. And I'm talking in the context of if we're going for all the layers. And then I say to the team, you pour salt on the wounds of that problem. I think it's really important. Do you mention it there? Be hyperbolic. Like really dial up that story. And then I think you deliver your solution. And how I'm describing this is very specific to telling maybe a corporate story or a vision film for you as an organization. But I do believe those principles transcend any type of storytelling, whether that's text, whether that's the way you think about your website, whether that's, an investment deck that you're producing to get people to buy into what you're doing. It feels like the storytelling you need to, or the story arc you need in order to sell whatever it is you do. I think that's interesting. But I'd say most importantly, there's what you say and there's what you show, and they should complement one another. And that's very pertinent if you're doing creative or telling stories just through static imagery. You have layers to a piece of creative, so think about that. When you go into video, you have sound, you have these additional layers. And that's what got me, I suppose, really interested in the Christopher Nolan, because he can take the most complex of storylines and fit it all on a page because he's a master of kind of structuring. And he uses layers for him to be able to do that. And I think there's a lot that marketeers could learn from that type of depth of cinematography or those sort of systems.
Yeah, one other kind of framework we like is start with the tweet. So like whenever we're doing a big campaign or a big piece of storytelling, the first thing I'll do is write, what will the announcement tweet look like? And then you kind of, what that helps you do is really distill the core of the story, the core of the messaging you're trying to do. And then you kind of obviously expanded it from there. I think it came from Amazon. Amazon have a policy where they start with the press release. So they'll write the press release as the first piece of marketing they do, because then that helps them imagine and reverse engineer
the headline.
The depth, exactly, the headline. And I think our version of that has been the tweet. Like, how do we distill what we're trying to do in less than 280 characters? And you'll find pretty quickly when you're battling character limits, all of a sudden you remove all the bullshit that comes with, marketing briefs.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you were describing that, it takes me back to the start of my career when you were taught to take a brief. There was 3 questions you'd ask: who, what, why. Who's it for? What do you want them to do? Why should they do it? That's the simplest ball. I then got introduced, when I leveled up my brief taking, to the single proposition, which is, if you could distill down in a word what you do, what would that be? And it was usually, you could almost avoid the other things. And if there's one thing you could take away, it was that. Tell me your single proposition, and from there, I'm able. And, what you described is just another variation of that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's rooted in, give me the headline. That's kind of, what is it I'm working with? And reverse engineer that. Dude, love this chat, as always. See you next week.
See you next week.